Okay, so in Canada, how does it work for First Nations individuals who have Indian status when it comes to paying income tax on self-employment or business income? Well, I think some people think that First Nations individuals do not pay income tax, and that's not true. But there are certain circumstances where their income or part of their income will not be subject to income tax when it comes to self-employment or business income. Now, I just made a previous video talking about employment income. And employment income is completely separate from self-employment income or business income. So in this video, I'm focusing on business income, self-employment income. So individuals who are generating their own income, they're not employed by another company, another organization, they're not on payroll. And what I'm talking about in this video is also completely separate from sales taxes. I'm not talking about GST and PST and when you have to pay them and when you have to charge them and when you don't. This is only self-employment income and business income. And before I get into explaining those circumstances where a First Nations individual with Indian status may be exempt from having to pay taxes on their business or self-employment income, I do want to say that there are certain circumstances, rare circumstances and exceptions where maybe these guidelines don't apply. So I'm not the one who gets to make the decisions here. I'm just going to be reading directly from the Canada Revenue Agency website. And so I encourage everyone to read that website, and if it's unclear or if you feel like you have a special circumstance, the best thing to do is reach out to the Canada Revenue Agency and check with them. In some cases, you might need to apply for a ruling from them. But I think there is a lot of misunderstanding or lack of knowledge in this area when it comes to taxes. So I thought it would be useful just to make a short video explaining the basics. And I will leave a link in the video description below for the website that has all this information. It's really useful. It's a pretty long page, but talks about business income and income taxes, employment income taxes, and things like that for individuals with Indian status. So with that all being said, how can someone who's First Nations with Indian status not have their self-employment or business income subject to income tax in Canada, so federal and provincial income tax? Well, there are certain criteria that needs to be met, and the CRA identifies this criteria on their website, and they call them contributing factors. So I'm going to read directly from the CRA website to cover those connecting factors. So when it comes to the connecting factors, the CRA website says, when applying the connecting factors test to business income, the courts have indicated that the most significant connecting factors are, number one, where the income earning activities of the business take place. So where is the business actually being done? Where is the work being done that actually generates revenue? The second one states the type of business and the nature of the business activities. So what type of business is it? What are the nature of the business activities? Is this, a transport company? Is this a convenience store? Is this a cleaning company? What is the nature of the business and what type of business is it? The third connecting factor states where the management and decision-making activities of the business take place. So even if the business, the revenue generating activities are located in one area, maybe the management decisions and just the general administration and decision-making of the business are located somewhere else other than where the work is being done. Think, for example, if you have a construction company, all the construction might be done on site for your customers, but the management and the decision-making might be completely separate from where the work sites are, and those might be like at a head office somewhere else. And then the fourth one there says where the customers are located. So where are the customers? Are they on reserve? Are they off reserve? Are they kind of remote where you're not actually even going to visit them at their place of work or at their residence or something like that? So those four connecting factors are the most important connecting factors in the eyes of the CRA when it comes to determining whether or not business or self-employment income is subject to income tax for First Nations individuals with Indian status. So there can be a bit of a gray area there, but there are some examples on the website that you can read. But so just as an example, if someone is First Nations and they have Indian status and they live on reserve, they have their own business on reserve, all the work is being done on reserve, all the customers are on reserve, all the administration, all the decision-making, all the management is done on reserve, then it's pretty clear cut that their self-employment income will not be subject to income tax. And on the other hand, even if an individual is First Nations with Indian status, they live off reserve, they have a business off reserve, none of their customers on reserve, none of the work they're doing to actually generate revenue is located on reserve, then in most cases, there's nothing there to make it so that their earnings are not subject to income tax. And then everything else kind of falls in the middle depending on those other connecting factors. So again, you might need a ruling from the CRA. There are special and rare and unique circumstances and exceptions. Now, the CRA also identifies 4 other connecting factors that are considered less important, and so I will read those directly from the website. So it says other connecting factors that the courts have found to be less significant are: number 1, whether or not you live on reserve. Number 2, whether you maintain an office on reserve or take business orders from location on reserve. Number 3, whether your books and records are kept on reserve. And number 4, whether your administrative, clerical, or accounting activities take place on reserve. It continues to say, the above listing of connecting factors is not an exhaustive listing, since there are other potential connecting factors that could apply depending on the fact situation. In addition, a connecting factor will have different relevance and weight depending upon the specific facts of each case. As a result, there is no standard test that can be used to determine if the business income is situated on reserve. And then if you keep reading further, there are some examples there. So ultimately it depends. There are definitely scenarios where it's pretty clear cut that the self-employment or business income of an individual is not subject to income tax. Other times it's clear that it would be subject to income tax. And then other times, maybe it's a bit of a gray area, or maybe it's kind of a split. And now it's also important to be aware that it's not so black and white in the sense that either all of your self-employment or business income is either subject to tax or not subject to tax. It could be a split, so it could be prorated, where maybe if you are First Nations with Indian status and half of your work is conducted on reserve and half is off reserve, it may be the case that 50% of your self-employment income is not subject to income tax and the other 50% is. And if that's the case, then typically expenses are prorated in the same way. So if 50% of your revenue is not subject to income tax, then you don't claim 50% of your business expenses or self-employment expenses. And now sometimes it might make sense to claim more than 50% or less than 50% of your business expenses, even if exactly 50% of your revenue is not subject to income tax, assuming you are a First Nations individual with Indian status, because sometimes maybe you have more expenses to do work on reserve, or maybe your expenses are actually higher in relation to the expenses that are off reserve. So it can depend. But again, I recommend reading this website and looking at the examples because it makes it a lot more clear once you see some examples. And I already turned off the camera, but there's one thing that I wanted to add, and that's regarding dividends. So if you are self-employed, you have your own business and you've set up that business as a corporation, and again, you are First Nations with Indian status, then that's treated a little bit different as compared to if you're self-employed or have your own business as a sole proprietorship or in a partnership. So one important thing to be aware of is that if you do have a corporation and you're pulling out dividends, those are treated a little bit differently than employment income and self-employment income. Because if you do own the corporation and you make yourself an employee, then now you have employment income. And I made a whole other video on that, so you can watch that video and see how employment income is treated. But if you own the corporation and you pull out dividends, then I'm going to read directly from the CRA website again, just to explain how dividend income works. So the CRA website says about dividend income: if you are a shareholder of a corporation that operates only on reserve, any dividends you receive from the corporation will be eligible for the tax exemption under Section 87 of the Indian Act. This applies where the head office, management, and principal income generating activities of the corporation that pays your dividends are situated on a reserve. So in that case, it wouldn't really matter where you live, where you work, anything like that. It matters more about the corporation, where it resides, where the work is being conducted, where the decision making is being made, where the revenue generating activity of the business occurs. And so hopefully this video was useful. I know that there's a lot of uncertainty around this topic and just not a lot of people are familiar with it, but this website is a really good resource where you can better wrap your head around it. And I just thought I would make this video to briefly summarize it. So hopefully the video is useful. If so, please click like and feel free to check out my YouTube channel here and subscribe. I currently have almost 300 videos that cover business startup and business management topics.